Few other types of flying bring the freedom enjoyed by float flying. From the craggy shores of Newfoundland to the equally rugged shores of the British Columbia coastline, and north to the land of the Northern Lights, Canada's many lakes and rivers provide float plane pilots with an infinite variety of destinations. Generally operating far from crowded skies and the constraints of air traffic control, flying floats can be one of aviation's most pleasant experiences. But what makes float flying so enjoyable also contributes to some of its inherent challenges. Once in the air, except for the added weight of the floats and some minor handling differences, flying a float or wheel-equipped aircraft are pretty much the same. Where the major differences occur is getting into the air and returning back to the earth. For example, unlike more traditional runways, landing and takeoff surfaces for float planes are not specifically prepared and marked. Surrounding topography and local variable wind conditions make each arrival and departure a different one. And in many remote areas where float planes are most likely to operate, there is little supporting infrastructure, like flight service stations, weather reporting, positive control zones, or the airport snack bar. So pilots must be well prepared for each flight, have a thorough knowledge of local conditions, and be aware that truly every takeoff and landing will be different. To add a float endorsement to your license, you'll need 5 hours of dual instruction and 5 solo takeoffs and landings. Unfortunately, conditions during a checkout may not provide opportunities to actually experience all the conditions that make float flying so challenging. Things like glassy water, rough water, or takeoffs and landings in crosswind conditions. As a result, more than 20% of all float plane accidents happen to pilots with 100 hours experience or less in float plane operations. So what can a new, or for that matter, an experienced float plane pilot do to reduce the risks? First, keep in mind that getting the endorsement is just the first step in becoming a proficient float plane pilot. It is really only a license to learn. And one of the best ways to learn is through the experience of others. At every opportunity, talk to instructors or other more experienced float plane pilots. They have probably encountered many of the challenges and have found ways to reduce the risks they pose. It's always better to learn from the experience of others. Make sure that you are totally conversant with the performance characteristics of your own aircraft. Part of that knowledge will come from the Aircraft Operation Manual. Other sources include a variety of excellent float plane instructional books that are available. But the actual hands-on experience comes from practice. Knowing the amount of landing, and in particular takeoff distance that is required for your aircraft, is important. You should practice from time to time and incorporate a number of variables like water and wind conditions, loading, and different ambient air temperatures. Each will play a factor, especially in the performance of a float-equipped aircraft. Part of the knowledge of what you and your aircraft are safely capable of should also include the rate of climb after leaving the water. Often, the best destinations for float planes are the lakes that would be otherwise inaccessible, and frequently they are surrounded by steeply climbing terrain. When operating a float plane away from populated areas, ensure that you are prepared with sufficient survival equipment in case you may have to spend some unscheduled time either waiting out the weather or in the unlikely event of a forced landing. And part of that equipment should also include flotation devices for every person on board. This brings us to the life jacket question. There are some who feel that life jackets should be worn by all occupants of a float plane during all phases of flight. They believe that trying to escape from an overturned float plane that may be sinking rapidly is no time to be grasping for a life jacket, even if it is readily accessible. Others feel just as strongly that a life jacket can hinder one's efforts to escape from an aircraft, especially if the wearer has panicked and inflated it while still inside the airplane. There is no single answer that fits every float plane in every circumstance. It depends on the individual pilot and the individual aircraft. Regardless of the decision, a pre-flight briefing on how to escape the airplane is essential. And that briefing should also include a demonstration on how to open the doors and get out, where to find the safety equipment on board and how to use it, and a warning of the dangers of walking forward on a float towards the propeller, even if it's not turning. And if you're a passenger, insist on a safety demonstration before the airplane leaves the dock. Float plane flying can be some of the best you'll ever experience. Just be aware of the challenges involved and do your part in reducing those risks. I'm Mike Dwaron, inviting you to return next week to fly with us through the Overcast.